The desire for a positive experience is itself a negative experience. Conversely, accepting a negative experience turns it into a positive experience. That seemingly paradoxical statement is the red thread running through this book. A work that has made millions of readers stop and question the entire concept of happiness, success, and the meaning of life. It does not give people familiar slogans, does not paint a sparkling picture of a better life if we just believe and try. Instead, it does the opposite, stripping away all the glitter, leaving behind the naked but liberating truth that suffering is not the enemy but inevitable and necessary. The book raises difficult questions. Why is it that the more we chase after positivity, the more negative we feel? Why is it that a society filled with conveniences, opportunities, and information is a place where people are more prone to depression and anxiety than ever before? And is it possible that what we should be seeking is not more happiness but the right amount of pain to accept? The reader will be led through many levels of perception. From the story of a loser named Charles Bukowski, who turned his dead-end life into a literary legacy, to the ancient philosophy of Shircha under the Bodhi tree about the undeniable truth that life is suffering. From chilling analyses of the feedback loop of suffering in the modern mind, to blunt reminders that everyone is, after all, ordinary and no more special than anyone else, but instead of leaving the reader to despair, the book opens up another path. Freedom comes not from having it all, but from knowing how to say no to much. Keep only what is really important. Maturity is not about reducing suffering, but choosing the right kind of suffering to stick with. Responsibility is not a burden but a liberation. Failure is not the end but the only way forward in death. What many fear is the very reminder that makes every moment count. Amidst a world constantly selling promises of easy success and instant happiness, this work does not shy away from being a voice against the current. It does not caress the reader with illusions but invites them to face paradoxes squarely. The more sure the way, we are more likely to make mistakes. The more we avoid failure, the more we fail. The more we want to be loved, the lonelier we feel. And the remaining question is for everyone listening. If life is inherently painful, what is worth our limited attention? What pain is worth accepting? And if I have to die one day? As certain as breathing is, we want to be remembered for how we lived. And before going into the book review, we encourage listeners to buy and read it to fully experience the book's content. Because only when you read this book will you understand the issues I am talking about. Please buy the book and support the author. Now let's start reviewing this book with me. I once knew a man who was unlike anyone else in the eyes of the boss world. All his life he was a failure, a drunkard, and a debaucher. Never been recognized by society. He wrote hundreds of manuscripts and hundreds of them were thrown back with cold rejections. He lived in cheap rooms that smelled of cigarettes, worked in the post office to make ends meet, and got drunk in the evenings. If one looks at his life, one sees only a series of nonsense, a born loser. But Bukowski eventually became a multi-million copywriter. He wrote 6 novels and hundreds of books of poetry. The name is known around the world and on tombstones. He carved the 2 words Danch Chi. I am haunted by that saying, because it exposes a truth that society always tries to hide. Bukowski did not succeed by believing in himself or trying endlessly, as empty slogans might suggest. He succeeded because he was honest about his own failures and mediocrity. Only when there is no more pretending, can words be naked, alive and touchable. I looked around me and saw a paradox. We do not live in times of scarcity. But in a time of abundance, of information, of choice, of promises of a better life from television commercials to social media, there are voices urging us on every day. Be more beautiful, be richer, be more special, be more positive. What is the result? People are becoming more and more unhappy. I call it the feedback loop of suffering when we worry. Then worry about your own worries when you are sad. Then feel ashamed for being sad when we are angry. Then hate yourself for being so angry. Pain grows pain and turns into a vortex that swallows us. And in today's world where everyone is portraying a fake picture of happiness online, the vortex tightened even more. Not only do we suffer, but we suffer because we believe we are not allowed to suffer. The truth is quite different. Suffering is a natural part of life. The more we run away from it, the more it swallows us. More desire for a positive life. The more negative I feel. The more we want to succeed, the more we find ourselves failing. Philosopher Allen was calls it the inverse law. The desire for a positive experience is itself a negative experience. And accepting a negative experience turns it into a positive experience. That's why I believe the art of living is not to stop caring, but to choose what is worth caring about. People cannot help but care. But our attention is limited. Like the last coins in the pocket. We can't throw them at everything. Children cry because the balloon color is not suitable, because they do not know how to choose. Adults learn to ignore the uncomfortable looks from strangers to pay attention to family, loved ones, and the things that truly define them. Maturity is learning to save your cares, put them where they belong, and because death is always just around the corner. What we choose to pay attention to determines the meaning of our lives. One never regrets missing out on a new phone. They only regret not daring to love, not daring to live truthfully, not daring to persevere with important things. I've found that the greatest freedom comes not from having it all, but from knowing how to let go of almost everything in order to hold on to the few things that truly matter. I used to wonder why we hang around feeling unhappy even when nothing too bad is happening. The answer lies in a strange mechanism of the mind. I not only experience pain, I know I am in pain. Not only am I sad, I am ashamed of being sad. I'm not just worried, I'm worried about worrying. And from there the suffering just doubled and tripled. Into a vortex that tightened around me. This is not just me. Almost everyone has fallen into that cycle. An anxious person feels weak and then gets angry about that weakness. A sad and silent person becomes rich and then despises himself for his gloom. A lonely person then feel humiliated because of that loneliness. The feedback loop of suffering needs no one else. It runs itself into our heads like a grinding machine, and modern society has turned it into a widespread epidemic. I hear voices urging, be happy, be positive, be strong. Turn on the TV, see the perfect smiling face in the commercial, open social media. See friends show off their happy moments. So just one day I felt sad. Immediately in the head rang. What's wrong with me? Why is everyone okay and I'm not? It is the belief that suffering is abnormal that makes us unhappier. Our grandparents in the past knew when they were sad, knew when they were tired, they rested. As for me and this generation, when we see ourselves faltering, we immediately conclude that something is wrong, that we are inferior. So the pain that started out as just a scratch turned into a deep wound. I learned that the solution lies not in getting rid of sadness but in accepting it. When I can look fatigue in the eye and say yes, I am tired today, so what? The spiral stops. Accepting the negativity is the way to make it disappear. There is a paradox I cannot deny. The more I crave a positive experience, the more I reinforce the fact that I'm lacking it, the more I long for happiness. The more I insist that I am unhappy, the more I long to be loved. The more I assert my loneliness, the more I want to succeed. I further emphasize my uselessness. And conversely, when I let go of accepting the negative experience, a positive one opened up. When I accept sadness, my mind is at ease. When I accept failure, I find the lesson. When I accept death, I learn to appreciate every moment. This feeling is not just an abstract philosophy, it is present in every little experience. The pain in the gym, the sweat, the fatigue, the pounding heart. It turned out to be a sign that I was getting better. Failure at work, loss, shame, and slip-up become experience for the next love quarrel, hurt, and crying. Sleepless nights help build lasting trust. Everything of value comes with pain. And from here I realized that life is not a search for positive emotions but a journey of choosing the suffering worth living. Because happiness is not when all problems disappear, but when I solve a meaningful problem. But to get there, I first have to know how to allocate attention. I can't put it all on hold. My energy is limited and what makes me me is how I choose to spend it. A child cried over the color of the balloon, because he did not know how to choose. An adult can ignore a nasty look from a stranger but will be willing to fight for a loved one, mature. For me it's about learning to care less. As I began to see that limitation clearly, a strange liberation came. I will never be everything, never please everything, never solve all problems. And in that admission, I found relief. Freedom is not in having everything, but in having almost everything. Keep only the few that are truly important. Many people misunderstand that when I say don't care, it means become emotionless, live like a rock, don't vibrate, don't react. But that's not what I meant at all. Not caring does not mean ignoring everything, but daring to be selective, daring to focus on a few things that are truly worthy. I realized 3 simple truths. First, not caring does not mean being indifferent but daring to be different. When I speak the hard truth and am ridiculed, I keep going. Because it's important to me to stand up for my loved ones. Regardless of being hated, that is true indifference. And the one who is always silent, always avoiding, always afraid of what others think. They actually care so much about judgment that they lose themselves. Second, to not care about adversity, I must care about something greater than adversity. I once saw an old lady throw a tantrum in the supermarket because her coupon was not accepted. That ticket became the last ditch. For those who have bigger things to worry about, family, love, faith, ideals, those small things no longer matter. When I put my whole heart into a project, a relationship, a belief, all the mocking looks and bad words suddenly become like passing wind. Third, whether I like it or not, I always have to choose what I care about. I can't stay out of this game every day that passes. I am giving my attention to something. The question is, do I give what is deserved or waste it on trifles when young? I used to get so worked up over little things. The balloon color is wrong. Friends do not invite to hang out. The score is not as good as expected. More mature. I understand more and more that maturity comes not from suffering less but from choosing the right suffering. I stopped being angry because of strangers' statuses online, stopped being angry because the TV remote control ran out of batteries. Instead, I save my energy for family, for integrity, for work I believe is meaningful. Everyone has a limited reserve when they are young. I squandered it like a candy dispenser, throwing attention everywhere. As a result, I was empty, with nothing left for myself. The older I get, the more I understand that life is too short to worry about everything. And then a strange relief came. I don't need to be a genius, I don't need to save the world, I don't need to be loved by everyone. I just need to be brave enough to choose a few things that are really important and devote myself to them. It was then that I truly felt free. I remember one time I decided to try something I had always been afraid of, without thinking, without considering what other people thought. And surprisingly it worked. When I let go of fear, I did more than I thought possible. It's the power of subtly not caring, of letting go of meaningless torment to focus entirely on what's worth living for. I finally realized that the art of living is not in accumulating more but in subtracting. Drop the positive illusions, drop the desire for praise, drop the need to prove. Only then will true values emerge. Family, friendship, honesty, personal beliefs are few but enough to define who I am, and it is this realization that opens the next door. I understand that happiness is not a destination but a problem that never goes away. And then I began to accept a hard truth. Life is suffering. I remember an ancient story. Thousands of years ago, a young prince lived in a luxurious palace at the foot of the Himalayas. His parents wanted to protect him from all suffering, so they built thick walls, shielding him from all sickness, old age and death. He grew up surrounded by music, parties, and all the pleasures that power can bring. But as the days went by, he felt more and more empty. One night, he went beyond the city walls and saw for the first time a sight he had never seen before. A sick person struggling, an old man with a hunched back, a cold corpse. In that moment, the shimmering world collapsed. There was no place in the world that could escape suffering. He left everything behind, lived like a beggar, endured hunger and thirst, and tortured his body, hoping to find answers. But that voluntary suffering did not reveal anything. Finally he sat under the Bodhi tree and swore that he would not get up until he understood after 49 days. He saw the simple truth: life is suffering and suffering is the root of existence. That story is not a legend to be told for the sake of telling. It is a mirror of reality, rich or poor, strong or weak. Everyone has their own form of suffering. Discontent is no exception. It is the law and irony. It is that dissatisfaction that drives us to search, change, create, and evolve. I used to think happiness was a destination, that if I had enough money, enough love, enough success, I would be at peace forever. But I was wrong. Happiness is not a static state, it is the result of a continuous process of problem solving. To illustrate this, I imagined a frustrated panda character. He wore a stuffy suit, had an expressionless face, knocked on doors, did not sell, did not give incentives, but gave people the truth that no one wanted to hear: money does not make your children love you more. A shaky marriage cannot be saved by a luxury vacation. Today's success will quickly be replaced by a new insecurity tomorrow. Then he left, leaving a heavy silence. Cruel? Maybe. But the naked truth is always a hard pill to swallow, but necessary. It is like bitter vegetables in the meal. Hard to eat but helps the body stay healthy. I believe that reminders like that save us from the sweet poison called positive illusions. Because suffering is not something to be eliminated, but is a signal for change. Physical pain teaches us to pull our hand away from the fire. Mental pain teaches us to adjust our lives. If a society seeks to eliminate all discomfort, pampering itself from all conflict, it will produce weak, fragile people who collapse at the slightest challenge. Therefore, it is important not to avoid problems but to choose the kind of problems we want to have in life. I can't live a problem-free life, but I can choose problems worth solving. Rich people still have money problems, but they are much better problems than those who struggle for every penny. A professional athlete still suffers from injuries and pressure, but it is a pain they accept in exchange for achievement. A person who truly loves will have to face jealousy and anger. But it is those collisions that make love deeper. I realize that happiness is a form of responsibility. When I choose to take on a problem and solve it, I choose a form of happiness, and how I face problems determines who I am. I have seen two false exits that people often choose. One is to deny and pretend nothing is wrong. Wear a mask of laughter in the midst of pain. Second is to blame, make yourself the victim, and wait for others to take responsibility. Both lead to a deadlock only if I accept. This is my problem and I will solve it. Then true happiness appears. However, there is a habit that is more dangerous than all of them: the worship of emotions. Many people believe that emotions are the ultimate compass, that when you feel happy you do something, when you feel sad you don't, but emotions are just signals, not commands. Like the warning light on your car dashboard. It flashes to indicate something, but doesn't always reflect the whole truth. If I live only by my feelings, I am no different than a dog led by instinct. Emotions are fragile and fleeting. Today's joy will fade, today's pain will also fade. Chasing emotions is like running on a conveyor belt of pleasure, thinking you are moving forward but actually just going in circles. And that's when I have to ask another question. It's not what I want, it's what pain I'm willing to endure. Because true happiness lies in that choice. I used to think the most important question in life was what do I want? But then I realized it was just a trap. Everyone wants to be successful, everyone wants to be loved, everyone wants to be healthy, rich and happy. That question is worthless because it only exposes vague desires that we all share. The real question should be how much pain am I willing to endure? Because happiness is inseparable from suffering. To have a strong body, I have to accept days of sore muscles and restrictive diets. If I want my career to flourish, I have to accept working hard, being under pressure, and facing failure. If I want a lasting love, I have to accept arguments and hurts. Moments of disagreement and pain are the entrance tickets to all worthwhile joys. I fooled myself for years thinking I wanted to be a rock star. I imagine myself standing on stage, thousands of people cheering. But the truth is, I don't love boring practice sessions, can't stand lugging around equipment, and don't have the patience to play the same piece over and over again until it's perfect. I want the result but I don't want the painful process that leads to it. And so that dream remained only in my head. Many people fail not because they are not smart or talented enough, but because they are not willing to love the pain that comes with what they say they want. Real athletes love that exhausted feeling after a workout. Entrepreneurs really love the stress of uncertain deals. True artists love the solitude of their creative process. It was that love of suffering that brought them to success. So when I ask myself what do I want? The answer no longer matters. What I need to ask myself is what pain am I willing to pay? Because that's what defines me. And then I saw another truth clearly. Happiness is not the ultimate reward. It is a problem-solving journey. Every time I face a problem, accept it, and start solving it, I enter a state of happiness not after solving it but during the process. Let's take a simple example, I want to be healthier. So I signed up for the immersion class immediately. I have a new problem, wake up early, tired, sweat pouring, body aches. And it is when I work every day to solve these problems that I feel happy. Or when I get into a relationship, I have to face other problems. Differences, difficult conversations, misunderstandings. But when I go through it with the other person, the love becomes deeper and happiness is there. Happiness does not consist in the absence of problems, but in choosing the right kind of problems to live with. But many people choose shortcuts. One is to deny the problem, they put on a mask, pretend everything is okay. While inside they are blaming each other, they turn themselves into victims, waiting for others to change, waiting for the world to rescue them. Both paths lead to despair. Because when we deny responsibility, we also deny the possibility of finding happiness. I learned that emotions are just signals, not truth. If I only live by my emotions, I will never get far because emotions are fragile. Constant change. Today's joy becomes tomorrow's boredom. Today's pain fades tomorrow. If I keep running, I'll be stuck on the conveyor belt of pleasure. Thinking you are moving forward but actually just marking time. What I need is a solid value system to choose issues worth living and stick with them. Because in the end, life is not about finding joy, but about choosing the kind of suffering you are willing to endure once you have had one. I believe that I am special, that there is something inside me that is completely different from the rest of the world. It was the sweetest dream. But also the most dangerous trap. Modern society promotes that illusion everywhere. I heard the reminder. Believe that you are extraordinary. Believe that you are different. That you deserve greatness. From school to media. From inspirational speakers to wall slogans. Everyone says you are special, you are unique. You were born to shine. But I realized the truth was much richer. I am not special and neither are you. The illusion of exceptionalism has two sides. On the one hand it makes us deluded. Thinking oneself greater than one is. Such people live in a dream world, always feeling undervalued, always thinking that one day the world will have to recognize their talent, but that day never comes. On the other hand, there are those who think they are special in a negative sense. I am so bad that no one understands me. They embrace their suffering as a kind of self-evidence. Both Tai-Kais stem from the same root, the illusion of being exceptional. I have met people who indulge in this kind of self-deception. A guy who was convinced he was going to be a tech millionaire even though he could never write a single line. He believes that destiny will bring success, as long as he dreams big enough. Of course fate never knocks. And there are also other friends of mine who always complain that no one can understand their pain, that they are more unfortunate than everyone else. They are also looking for something special just in the dark. The real growth of the self only began when I gave up that particular illusion. When I accepted that I was normal, I began to learn. Only when I accept that I am no better than anyone else, can I truly listen. When I accepted that I was no exception, I dared to try and dare to fail. Thinking you are special turns out to be the shortest path to weakness. Because if I believe I'm different, I can't stand reality. One criticism is enough to make me collapse. One failure is enough to knock me down deep down. I don't want to face the truth. I am just a human being, stupid, fallible, contradictory, and mortal like everyone else. Accepting normalcy is not about lowering yourself, it's about laying the foundation for growth. It's normalcy that frees me from the pressure of having to prove, of having to be different, of having to be accepted. And in that freedom, I can do the things that are truly important to me, not because they make me stand out, but because they have meaning. I've seen this weird loop all over the place. On the internet people show off their achievements and uniqueness. But the more they do so, the emptier they feel. The comparison never stops. Because if your yardstick is special, you will always find yourself lacking. There is always someone richer, better, more famous, happier. I realized that it was the idea that I had to be special that made me miserable when I pushed it aside. A new space opens up. A space where I can try and fail without fear. Where I can fail without self-contempt. Where I can be a normal person but live a life with no regrets. The paradox here is that it was only when I accepted that I was not special that I began to live a special life, not more special than others, but special in the true sense. A life true to yourself. There is a truth no one wants to hear. Pain is inevitable. And what makes the difference between a wasted life and a meaningful life is not whether we suffer, but what we suffer for. I imagine the process of self-awareness like peeling off the outer layer of an onion, which is the immediate emotion. I am angry, I am sad, I am happy. If I stop there, I will just live like a leaf blown by the wind. Today like this, tomorrow like that. When I dig deeper, I find the next layer of the cause of that emotion. I am angry at being looked down upon. I am sad because I feel lonely. I am happy to be recognized. But if I peel back further, I get to the core layer, the value I'm using to judge my experience. It is these values that determine the quality of every emotion. Bad values turn suffering into a meaningless burden. Good values turn suffering into something meaningful. I used to have wrong values. I used to believe that happiness lay in being admired, in having others appreciate me. But when used as a measure, every tearful look, every word of criticism becomes a wound. I hurt not because of the truth but because I chose a bad value to measure myself. I used to believe that money was everything, and so I worked hard, wore out my health, traded my time, and the money came. But with that comes an emptiness. Because that value leads me to never-ending problems. The so-called bad values often lie in being out of control or being too dependent on others. Fame, status, prominence, feeling special. All are unstable measures that make me forever uneasy. On the contrary, when I choose values based on what I can control, suffering becomes lighter: honesty, responsibility, integrity, effort. Those are good values. They turn pain into a teacher. When I am criticized, instead of falling apart, I learn to discern what is a necessary reminder. When I fail, instead of blaming myself, I learn to take responsibility and try again. When I'm tired, I still feel relieved knowing I'm trying for something meaningful. I have seen people suffer because of fame. They live in the limelight, but one small scandal and their world comes crashing down. I have seen people suffer because of superficial love. They are busy maintaining the image of the perfect couple. But when the admiring glances disappear, the relationship is hollow. That's the tragedy of choosing bad values. On the contrary, I have also seen ordinary people living quietly, but their values are as solid as rock. They suffer from hard work but remain honest. They suffer because of the difficulty of raising children, but love and responsibility make them strong. That's the beauty of good value. It turns suffering into dignity. I finally realized we cannot avoid suffering, but we have the power to choose what to suffer with. And that choice defines life. I no longer seek to escape the pain. Instead, I ask what value this pain comes from. If it comes from vanity, I learn to let go. If it comes from love, from responsibility, from believing in myself, I'm willing to embrace it. That's when I realized pain is not the enemy. It is a mirror that reveals my true worth. There are days when I want to run away, to say that everything that happens is because of fate, because of other people, because of the world out there. But the truth kept ringing in me. I am always choosing. Even if I don't want to. I did not choose where I was born or what happened to me. But I always choose how to react. Fault and responsibility are not the same thing. An accident may not be my fault. But how I endure it afterwards is my responsibility. Someone betrayed me, that was not my fault but my decision to forgive. Leave or live in hatred, that is my choice. The world can throw all kinds of chaos at me, but I get to decide what story to turn it into. I have been caught in the comfortable victim trap. When I can say that I suffer because others make me suffer, it brings temporary comfort. As if I were innocent. I am empty-handed because life is unfair. But that very comfort binds me to helplessness when I give responsibility to others. I also give up control of my life. I remember once meeting a man who lost his entire family in a terrible accident. That pain is not your fault. But how he lived after that was his choice. He could collapse, burying himself in hatred. But he chose a different path, turning pain into a reason to live a kinder life. Cherish every breath when listening to him tell. I realized that it is those choices that determine a person's dignity. On the other hand, I also meet people who always see themselves as victims of everything. They were abandoned in love. So they believe that no one in the world is trustworthy. They lost their jobs. So they believe that all companies are evil. They met with a failure. So they believe that the whole universe is against them. Being a perpetual victim may make one feel special, but the price is freedom. There is an unpleasant truth: there is no formula. No one gave me a handbook on how to get through tragedy. It is only in each present moment where I have to choose to fall or stand up, resent or forgive, run away or face it. It is those silent choices that make me. I realized that many times I didn't act, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I was afraid to admit that I was responsible. It was much easier to blame my parents, my ex, or society. But that ease comes in return for confinement. Only when I put my hand on my heart and accepted that this is my life and I am responsible for it did I truly feel free. There is a paradox in which responsibility is not a burden but a door that opens to liberation. When I accept that my happiness or unhappiness is my choice, I truly have the power to change. Conversely, when I insist that everything is someone else's fault, I make myself their prisoner. Every day from small to big things, I am making choices. Choose where to give your attention, choose how to react to difficulties, choose what suffering is worth it. Those choices quietly weave my life thread by thread. And looking back, I find I'm no longer afraid of that truth because of the responsibility. I found freedom. I have often wondered why some people fall down in the face of adversity, while others rise up stronger. The answer always leads me back to the same point. The difference lies in how we choose to react. Someone lost his job. They sat cursing their fate, falling into alcohol, waiting for a miracle. There are people who lose their jobs but they choose to sit down, learn another skill and embark on a new journey with an incident. But the two paths are different and the results are also very different. I can't control the cards life deals me, but I can always control how I play them. I may have been born into poverty, I may have faced injustice, I may have been born with a disease, but how I choose to live with those things defines who I am. This is where many people get confused. The fault is not always mine, but the responsibility is always mine. A child is abandoned, it is not his fault, but how he chooses to live the rest of his life being defined by the past or letting the future unfold, that is his responsibility. Me too, no one gives me absolute justice, but I have the right to choose the meaning of what happened. There are times when I stand before tragedy and feel small and helpless. But then I realized even in the darkness, I still had one final choice. Meaningful choices. A prisoner may be in chains, but no one can take away his choice of how to see the world. And that choice is sometimes the difference between survival and destruction. I have seen many people try to escape responsibility by blaming. They say, I suffer because my parents are like that. I fail because society is unfair. I am unhappy because my lover does not understand me. It sounds reasonable. But behind that is surrender. Once I believe that my life is decided by others, I have removed all opportunities for change. On the contrary, when I begin to take responsibility, I find myself powerful. Once I am betrayed, I can resent for the rest of my life. But I choose to ask myself, where was I blind? What do I need to learn from this wound? And that question helps me stand up. I no longer want to wait for justice from the outside. I just want to live differently so as not to repeat the same mistakes. Some people say, but how can I endure it? The answer is there is no way, there is no ready-made formula, there is no magic advice, there are only small choices in each moment. Every morning I wake up, I can choose to complain or I can choose to do what needs to be done, and it is that series of choices that weaves a life. This is another paradox that I had to learn. Responsibility sounds like a burden but is actually freedom. Because when I accept that everything is my responsibility, I also give myself the control to change it. And when I push responsibility onto others, I also throw away my freedom. When I understand this, I feel a strange relief. I don't need to win every game. I just need to honestly admit how I am choosing, and in that honesty, I am no longer a victim. I am the driver. No matter how bumpy the road is, I used to believe that I knew many things for sure, that I understood myself, understood others, understood how this world works. Then each layer of that illusion collapsed one by one. I was wrong and I will always be wrong. Maturity does not come from finding the absolute truth but from admitting that I never choose the truth. The danger of certainty is that it lulls me. Once I think I am right, I stop listening. I will be rigid, stubbornly keep the faith. Even when reality has changed. All knowledge is temporary, all beliefs are just hypotheses, and all certainties are illusions. I remember once I believed that a relationship would last forever. I considered it the truth, unchangeable. But then when the pent-up conflicts exploded, everything fell apart. I not only lost a person but also lost the very belief that I could be sure of anything. That shock taught me one thing: everything in life is fragile, including my own beliefs. The irony is that the more I cling to certainty, the more likely I am to collapse when it is challenged. A person who believes they are always right will break when faced with evidence to the contrary. A person who believes their love is eternal will be paralyzed when the other person leaves. The more I cling to an absolute truth, when it shakes, my whole being shakes. I began to learn to doubt myself, not to become I am a pessimist, but to keep myself open. I was wrong today and I will be wrong tomorrow. But that is not a disaster, but an opportunity to adjust. Like sailing on the sea, I never go straight, but constantly adjust. This truth frees me because when I accept that I am wrong, I am no longer obsessed with being right. I can listen to others without being defensive. I can experiment without fear of being wrong. I can change my beliefs when I have a strong enough reason. This flexibility does not weaken me, but makes me more sustainable. Some people fear uncertainty, consider it an enemy. But I am starting to learn to see it as a companion. It is uncertainty that makes me seek to learn, to constantly ask questions. It is uncertainty that gives me the motivation to explore, to create, to not rest on my laurels. So instead of asking if I am sure, I ask where I am willing to go wrong. Because that question does not close but opens, it makes me move forward, constantly learning. I ask, constantly adjusting. And I also see that all beliefs have a price. If I choose to believe that I am special, I will pay with loneliness and illusion. If I choose to believe that I am powerless, I will pay with confinement and unhappiness. No belief is free. So I learn to choose my beliefs based on the impact they have on my life, not on the feeling of certainty they bring. I have been wrong many times, and that does not make me inferior. It is the daring to be wrong that makes me move forward. The more I accept being wrong, the closer I am to a truly free life. The older I get, the more I see one truth. Absolute belief is the most dangerous thing. It gives us a sense of security. But that feeling is an iron trap. When I cling to something as if it cannot be wrong, I lock myself in, and any change in reality can crush me. I call it the law of avoidance. It is human nature to avoid information that threatens our identity. Myself. When a belief has become a pillar of my ego, I will find every way to protect it, even denying the obvious truth. I used to believe that I understood love. I used to think that as long as I was sincere enough, sacrificed enough, love would last forever. That was the belief that made me proud, made me feel noble until that love cracked. The signs had been there for a long time. But I ignored it, my friends reminded me, I laughed coldly. I myself knew everything was broken, but I made excuses, tried to hold on. I did not avoid the truth because I was ignorant, but because I was afraid. If I admitted the truth, it meant I had to admit that my belief in eternal love was wrong. And then my identity collapsed. Later, I realized that I had repeated that mistake in many other areas. The belief in absolute fairness, the belief in control, the belief that I was special. All of them had blinded me to reality. I chose to distort information to protect your identity, instead of letting the truth shake your ego. There is a painful paradox: the more I cling to my certainty, the weaker I become. Because when the truth doesn't suit me, my whole world collapses. On the other hand, when I accept that I could always be wrong, I suddenly become stronger. The truth may hurt, but it doesn't destroy me. I began to see this everywhere. Political extremists can't listen to an opposing argument because it threatens their identity. Snobs can't admit mistakes because it destroys their image. Arrogant people never learn because new knowledge means they were wrong all along. We're all wired by the same thread, the fear of admitting the truth. I learned to put some distance between myself and my beliefs. I said to myself, what I believe today may be right, but it may also be wrong. And if wrong, I am willing to adjust. That doesn't disorient me. On the contrary, it makes me more flexible, less vulnerable, and more open to the world. When I allow myself to be wrong, I also allow myself to grow. The ability to make mistakes is the room for improvement. No one is born right. And if I'm always right, then I have nothing left to learn. So every time I face a hard truth, I don't run away. I sit back and listen to the discomfort as it tears away the painful shell of old beliefs. But from that crack, a new perspective is born. And I understand that the times I dared to admit I was wrong were the biggest turning points in my life. Maturity is not about acquiring more certainty, but about learning to live with uncertainty. I used to fear failure as much as I feared death. Every step is cautious. Every decision comes with a haunting. What if I'm wrong? What if I lose? But more afraid. The more prone I am to mistakes, the more I avoid them. I fell right into the pit I wanted to avoid. Until I realized failure is not the opposite of success but the only path to it. Every skill I have today was paid for by the series of failures I learned to write. The first few pages were so clumsy that I was embarrassed. I learned to love. First loves are full of wounds and mistakes. I learned to live and each fall scratched me to the bone. It was those failures that taught me how to move on. There is a paradox. The more I accept failure, the closer I get to success. When I stopped being afraid, I dared to try. When I dare to try, I have a chance to learn. As I learn, I change, and that change accumulates over time, transforming into a form of power that no book or lecture can give me. I remember the first time I stood in front of a hall to speak. I was shaking so much that my voice was hoarse, my hands were sweaty, and I didn't dare look at the audience. It was a humiliating failure. But after that day, I knew I had crossed the line of fear. I stood again and again. Every time I fall, I learn something new. How to control my breathing, how to look straight into the audience's eyes, how to accept that no one cares if I blush or not. And then one day I stood there without fear. Success is always built on the graveyard of failure. But today's society hides that truth. People only show off their achievements. No one talks about falling. But behind every glory are countless failures. If we don't understand this, we will think we are abnormal every time we fail. While the truth is I'm on the right track. I began to see failure like a mirror. It reveals the truth about yourself. I'm not good at anything. How impatient am I? What value am I choosing? Every failure is a time I am forced to look at myself. It hurts, but there is no other way to grow. I learned something too. My value lies not in avoiding failure but in how I deal with it. I can let failure define me. is useless. Or I can use it to build character. That choice is entirely in my hands. Then I began to see failure as a companion, unpleasant but always honest. It is not flattery, not pretense. It said straight to my face, "You are not enough." And that statement kept me going. Someone asked, how to get motivated. I smiled because I understood that motivation doesn't come before action, it comes after I sit there waiting for inspiration, waiting for perfection. I never get started. But when I do, however clumsily, I create momentum to continue action which leads to motivation, not the other way around. The key is not to avoid failure but to go straight into it through the wounds. I really grew up. I used to sit for hours in front of a blank page waiting for inspiration to come, used to promise myself I would start tomorrow and then postpone it another day, another week. That waiting made me think that motivation had to come first, that only when I felt excited could I act. But that was a lie I had told myself. The truth is that motivation does not lead to action. It is action that creates motivation. I call it the do something anything principle. Write a silly note, lift a light weight, make a clumsy phone call. Starting, no matter how small, leads to another movement, and then each small step accumulates momentum and momentum turns into motivation. I remember a period of deep crisis. I don't want to get out of bed, don't want to see anyone. My mind was filled with questions of why did I fail, why was life unfair, why did I end up in this situation? Those questions only dragged me deeper because they had no answers. Then one day, I got tired of that same deadlock and whispered, whatever, just do something. I stood up to clear the messy desk, a small task but it opened up the next one. Wash dishes, take a shower, reply to an email. Little by little, it pulled me out of the dark pit. The key is not in feeling but in doing. I don't need to feel confident to act. I just need to take action to build confidence. I don't need to wait to feel motivated to write. I just have to write a few bad lines and then the motivation comes. I began to understand that successful people are not always inspired, but because they take action when they are not inspired, and it is that action that feeds inspiration. Thinking back, this principle is so simple that it's almost obvious. Want to learn to swim? I can't sit on the shore reading books about swimming. I had to jump into the water, splash around, take a few sips, and then learn to float. Want to love? I can't sit around imagining a perfect relationship. I had to open my heart, say awkward words, accept hurt, then I knew what love was, wanted to live. I can't just sit and think about life. I must live, I must act. Regardless of mistakes, regardless of failures, action comes first, motivation follows. It was a paradox that cost me years of struggle to learn. And since I learned it, I no longer ask how to get motivated. I just told myself, just do something. When I take action, no matter how small, I take back control from fear. Because the biggest fear always lies in procrastination. When I sit still, my imagination weaves up all sorts of tragic scenarios that will fail, that will be laughed at, that will get me nowhere. But when I let those visions go, I'm left with what's right in front of me, and it's often not as scary as I thought it would be. I also realized another truth. Clarity doesn't come first, it comes in the doing. I never know what I want until I try. I don't find answers by endless thinking but by taking action and observing the results. Life is not a problem to be solved in the head but a game to be played. And so every time I stand at a crossroads, I no longer sit and wait for inspiration. I walked on even though the road ahead was dim because I knew that only by walking on the road would a book eventually appear. Just a collection of pages. But when read, it becomes a dialogue. Between my experience and your concerns, this journey is not about painting a perfect life but about reminding that a meaningful life comes not from eliminating suffering but from selecting suffering worth living with. I've talked about responsibility, about failure, about the need to say no, and about the ultimate truth. Death. All those ideas are not meant to sow fear but to open up a different perspective. It is the finiteness that makes each moment precious. You don't have to be special to live a special life. You just have to be honest with yourself and face the inevitable. I want to stop here to thank you for your patient listening. Not because you agree with everything I say, but because you've been willing to walk with me through these pages, asking difficult questions and facing uncomfortable truths. That listening completes half the meaning of the Book of Hours. I hope you will continue the dialogue, leave your thoughts, comments or criticisms, not to please the author but to challenge and clarify the values you believe in yourself. Each of your comments is a mirror that helps this conversation not end here but spread out to the community of people who are searching for answers for themselves. And if you have another book you'd like to hear, another story you think needs to be illuminated, please suggest it. Because maybe those choices will open up a next journey not only for me but also for you and for those who are sharing this conversation with us. Thank you, and I wish you the courage to choose both joy and pain. Uncle.